All right, little dude. Here we go. Lehi in the desert. As we continue, it is now Chapter 3, Into the Desert, and Section 1, which is Lehi the Dreamer. Last time on Lehi in the Desert, we found that many of the names were both Egyptian, Hittite, and a smattering of Greek. And like any good recipe, the final outcome was proportional to the input ingredients. We also learned that Lehi and Ishmael were likely both caravan traders, since they were able to up and go on a quick, well, not whim, but at a moment's notice to get things done. So now we go to Lehi the Dreamer. Lehi possesses, in a high degree, the traits and characteristics of the model sheik of the desert. He is generous, noble, impulsive, fervent, devout, and visionary. And he possesses a wonderful capacity for the eloquence and dreams. As to the dreams, when the Arabs wander, they feel they must be guided by dreams, and their sheiks are often gifted dreamers. Interesting. I had no idea. The substance of Lehi's dreams is highly significant. I would say so. Since men's dreams necessarily represent, even when inspired, the things they see by day, albeit in strange and wonderful combinations, it is common for men in every age, for example, to dream of ships, but a man in Lehi's day must dream of particular kinds of ships, and no others will do. In his dreams, Lehi finds himself wandering in a dark and dreary waste, a dark and dreary wilderness where he must travel for the space of many hours in darkness, lost and helpless. That's 1 Nephi 8, 4-8. Of all the images that haunt the early Arab poets, this is by all odds and... Wait, what? Whiplash. Of all the images that haunt the early Arab poets. So he's saying that, okay, you know how we talk about having common dreams? Like, for example, I have one where, say hi. Hi. Very good. So, you know how we talk about we have common dreams? Like, there are some people who say, oh, well, I had a dream that I was back in high school, but I didn't have my pants on. Oh, that's a common one. Or, for me, one that I shared with my siblings was ones where we'd be in some really intense situation, and the faster that we tried to run, the slower that we would go. Or, another common element dream is, I've had a couple of times, is where you just have so many teeth in your mouth, and they're just jumbling around. They're not like stuck inside your jaw or mouth. They're just like barely in there. And depending on how you hold your mouth, they'll stay in. Otherwise, if you say something wrong, that your teeth just start just dribbling out. It's kind of interesting. Other common dream themes. Some people, very few get the idea of flying or having lucid dreams, things like that. But I did not expect this, but this is the tack that he's going down, that apparently, of all the images that haunt the early Arab poets, this is by all odds the commonest. So apparently in Arab poetry, being in a dark and dreary wilderness with no one around, that is an extremely common poetical image that's there. It is the standard nightmare of the Arab, and it is the supreme boast of every poet that he has traveled long distances through dark and dreary wastes all alone. Wow. Invariably, darkness is given as the main source of terror. The heat and glare of the day, though nearly always mentioned, are given second place. The culminating horror is almost always a mist of darkness. They would have hated London. A depressing mixture of dust and clammy fog. which, added to the night, completes the confusion of any who wander in the waste. Ooh, there are footnotes here, and this one looks like it has information instead of just reference. The entire section on travel in the Hamish of Abu Taman, Calcutta, 1856, is taken up with the exhaustion and terror of travel in the dark. The mist of darkness is mentioned in nearly all passages given in preceding footnote. The country lying between Egypt and Palestine during November, there are often dense mists. These mists depend upon the wind and often alternate with intense droughts. Interesting. Thick mist descends upon the ground and blotted out landscape after sunrise. Everything was grimed with sand, and the sun was feeble and extreme. A light, clammy northern breeze gently fanned the thick, damp mist, etc. So he's showing some of the passages in the footnotes that show this. That is fascinating. I mean, if you're a desert traveler and every night being somewhat near water is extremely important, maybe not every night because you are a desert traveler, but imagine that you know you have a very limited time to get to your next source of water, and then suddenly you are caught up in a fog and you can't tell which way you're going. How slowly horrific your demise would be. That you are just lost and wandering and you have no way of finding true water and shelter. And you know that when the night is done, you will be baked in the day. And if you did not know where you are, or could not find your way, you're toast. But you're toast in a very slow, painful demise. Yeah, I can see why that would be a common enough element in Nightmares of the Arab. You all ready already? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so this is kind of like the embarrassment of having not your pants on in school. Obviously a lot worse, though. I'm wondering if people in Canada have dreams about being lost in a blizzard during a horrible snowstorm or something like that. I wonder if there's common elements in different regions for different things. I wonder if there's, that'd be fascinating to find out. You know, another one that I've had, I wouldn't call it a nightmare, but it's just ones that are odd, where it's just like, all right, time to square up my shoulders and get to work, is ones where I'm back out in the mission field. Because it's just like, oh, all right, hitch up the belt a little, tighten those shoelaces, let's get going. Anyway. All right. Whew. Let's see here. Lehi's mists of darkness conforms to this strange phenomenon most exactly. Oh, sorry. Quite contrary to what one would expect, these dank mists described by the travelers in all parts of Arabia and Al-Jaja, one of the greatest and earliest desert poets, tells how a mist of darkness makes it impossible for him to continue a journey in Damascus, and that's some of the stuff I was reading from the footnote. In its nature and effect, Lehi's mist of darkness conforms to the strange phenomenon most exactly. Of course, the mist of darkness, if we're taking it as temple symbolism for the tree of life, which I think we should, I think that's a very, very good use of it, is compared to the temple, the incense that would have been in the temple, is what Dave Butler suggests. But between it being a dream and Lehi's examples, I think it could all be one and the same. Meaning that, yes, absolutely, there's temple symbolism. But yes, absolutely, this is like common temple dream imagery. But yes, it has the same symbolism as is intended and should be received. So, when Lehi dreams of the vanity of the world, he sees a great and spacious building suspended in the air out of the reach and full of smart and finely dressed people. That is exactly how the Bedouin of the desert to whom the great stone houses of the city are an abomination, pictures of the wicked world, and as the city, Arabs still mock their desert cousins, whom they secretly envy, with every show of open contempt. So the well-dressed people in the big house were in the attitude of mocking and pointing their fingers at the poor little band of bedraggled wanderers hungrily eating fruit from a tree, and duly abashed that their poverty should be put to open shame. Okay, sorry. The reason I really want to comment on that is one thing that I've often wondered about is why did the Book of Mormon people fall, like in 3rd Nephi? Or was it 4th Nephi? Something like that. After 400 years, they just basically said, divisions came among us, we became prideful, and some of us stratified between rich and poor, and instead of helping everyone with their wealth, and then because of those divisions, we became prideful, and people separated themselves from the church because of that pride, and they started fighting against it, and so we're back in this time where we're all fighting each other and hate each other. And I was just like, this is dumb, right? I have grown up in such great prosperity that I did not have the concept of being stratified by rich and poor, being made fun of for not having enough. That was just not a thing, basically. I know there are some people who still are very adamant about, I don't want to be perceived as poor. What's weird is in all of the Book of Mormon, that was one of the most common ways to do that. The stratification in society, one of the easiest ways to stratify people is whether they are rich or poor. And that way, if you make fun of people who are poor, then you suddenly have this phobia of being perceived as poor. You think about manners and how you present yourself, all the dignity and stuff that you were supposed to show after the end of World War II, and all the etiquette stuff that they were teaching kids. Remember, even back then, there was a large show of you don't show people that you are poor. You don't show people that you are uneducated. So you have common things that can show, whether that is through your showing your intelligence, showing your manners, and your show of wealth. Now, still to this day, there are people who want to show off their wealth. Now it's focused on just being that guy who gets all those girls so that they can have their way or their choice of woman. And it's a very cynical point of view where it's like, yeah, what makes a man handsome? How thick is his wallet? That kind of stuff. It's a very bit different. It's a different thing. I'm saying that categorization that we have now is different from what it was before, where, sure, there's a similarity to those elements, that those who were rich could go out and do whatever. That's kind of always been around. But the show of wealth through etiquette, manners, dress, demeanor, and education all showed through. And if you were ignorant, and even, look even at Charles Dickens and The Christmas Carol. The two nasty, terrible spirits that were at the foot of the spirit of Christmas present was ignorance and want. So it shows through. These are things that are hard to hide, right? And he was saying that you should seek well, especially after these, and try and alleviate them. And it's, you look at the Book of Mormon, that's the same kind of thing. They always seem to divide among rich and poor. But I've lived in such a prosperous time that Mark Zuckerberg refused to wear, the founder of Facebook refused to wear a suit unless he was finally taken before Congress. It was always this kind of jeans, t-shirt, sometimes a hoodie kind of stuff. That this can be work attire here. I get to go to work just with, as long as I have a collar and pants, whether that, even jeans. I can wear jeans to work. The loosening of standards that you don't have to have a specific uniform to go to work, of a suit and tie, has been loosened to the business casual, which is as long as it has a collar, so no t-shirts, and as long as you have, conservative pants like jeans and slacks, you're fine. That it's I believe it's directly coming from, we have so much prosperity that there's not as much division among that anyway. That the divisions come from other things. It's through other ideologies. This is why the whole fight for communism against capitalism didn't work here in America along economic lines, because not only did we have a staunch recognition and appreciation for capitalism, the idea that anyone can make what they want of themselves because of laws that protect the little guy and allow for people to become rich, and also for the rich to become poor. There was great appreciation for that. And so everyone realized, why would I want to put down my maid or my servant, because they could be the next billionaire if they just made the next widget. The idea of the enterprising American prevented the communism from taking hold for a long time. Now, unfortunately, what we got was communism and all this other ills of society, division of society, is always peddled, personally, I think, by Satan, is just trying to divide people. And one of the easiest ones was dividing people by rich and poor. Well, since that didn't quite work, they switched to social things. So even though in the 90s we'd already had 30 years of the civil rights movement done, and everyone was we had like the token diversification in our different shows. Look at the Magic School Bus. We had the Asian, we had the black person on screen, we had the token white guy who was always the butt of jokes, and like it was already there, and we all had fun with it, and it was funny. And it was just, but they brought it back saying, see how horrible everyone is, and they started demonizing everyone again, and finger wagging, and just dividing us by racial lines, because that seemed to take more hold in academia and then in the media. I mean, in the 90s, we had books that made fun, that joked and parodied and made fun of political correctness. But then it took over, and cancel culture, and now we're 25 years past that, and we've reaped the rewards of dividing people, and we're still dealing with the division, because now that it's settled in ideological lines. Sorry, this huge aside is specifically to comment on the idea that, notice how Hugh Nibley is focusing on rich versus poor. So if you, like me, have lived in such abundance that the whole rich versus poor thing hasn't really affected you. We've seen cancel culture and ideology sifting and other things like that. All sorts of other things people get judged by. Or, religious sifting. Whatever else. It's less about rich and poor nowadays. So if you haven't experienced that, just remember, the same type of huge stigma and the giving people the stink eye that we see for speaking out of turn ideologically in a room that's ideologically one way, and then you say something out of line ideologically the other way. That same type of division existed, but it had a lot more to do with rich and poor throughout most of human history. And so he is really playing that up, because that was probably not only Hugh Nibley's experience, but the common experience of humanity throughout time. So, one is reminded by Lehi's imagery of the great stone house of the ancient Arabs, 10 and 20-story skyscrapers that represent genuine survivals of ancient Babylonian architecture. Whew. Wow, I didn't realize that they got that tall in Babylon. With their windows beginning for the sake of defense 50 feet from the ground, at night these lighted windows would certainly give the effect of being suspended above the earth. It is interesting. Oh, geez. Okay, so he's saying, these are real stuff, not just symbolic. That's interesting. All right, it is interesting that Joseph Smith Sr. had almost the same dream, according to his wife, who took comfort in comparing the wandering of her own family with those of Father Lehi. But what is significant is not the resemblance of the two dreams, but the totally different settings of the two. When the prophet's father dreamed himself lost in this field of the world, he could see nothing save dead, fallen timber. A picture which, of course, faithfully recalls his own frontier background. That's from History of Lucy Mack Smith. The dream is not to be minutely examined, since it's only Mother Smith's memory of the dream reported in her 34 years before. So they're not going deep into it. When Dante, another Westerner, sees himself lost in the midst of life's journey, one of the commonest and oldest dreams we repeat, a very classic among dreams, he is wandering through a dense, dark forest, the forest of his native Tuscany. Interesting. I'm wondering, have I had any dreams where I've been lost? I think I've had extremely vivid dreams, and in my very vivid dreams, which I've even been able to return to, the architecture and cities or places in those dreams and other later dreams, I was kind of up in the rolling hills of the foothills in Utah here. Like if you go up the canyon a little bit to up past Park City and like on your way to Heber or other places like that, the hills that you have up there. Interesting. Never thought of it being, the dreary waste of the world. Didn't seem to fit in the dreams that I had with those, but it's very interesting that, yeah, okay. In a pleasanter vein, Lehi sees a large and spacious field as if it had been a world. Just as the Arab poet describes the world as a maiden or large, M-A-I-D-A-N, maiden, except this vocabulary, maiden, or large and spacious field, is what it means. So, as the Arab poet describes the world as a maiden, or large and spacious field. When he dreams of a river, it is a true desert river, a clear stream, a few yards wide, with its source but 100 paces away, or else a raging muddy wash, a sail of filthy water. Again, vocabulary word of the day, sail, which is the tumultuous, muddy flow that sweeps people away to their destruction, which you can see videos of that on YouTube, by the way. And if you're common in southern Utah, when there's a flash flood, you see this just wall of water that's 2 or 3 feet deep, just with a ton of dead wood just roiling at the front of this flood as it comes down. And sometimes it can get really swift, depending on how big the downpour is and how narrow the river is. Because the more narrow it is, the more that it channels all that water. Whereas if it's nice and wide, it can go slowly and gently. In the year 960 AD, according to Bar Hebraeus, a large band of pilgrims returning from Mecca encamped in the bed of a brook in which water had not flowed for a long time. And during the night, whilst they were sleeping, a flood of water poured down upon them all, and it swept them and all their possessions out into the great sea, and they all perished. I believe it. Remember that. It's strong enough to push all those logs. And if you are about as big as the log, or your stuff is as light as those logs. Yeah. Even a mounted rider, if he is careless, may be caught off guard and carried away in such a sudden a sudden spate of filthy water, according to Doughty. One of the worst places for these gully-washing torrents of liquid mud is the scarred and bare mountains, which run parallel to the west coast of Arabia. The rainstorms break against this long ridge and produce almost in a moment raging torrents. The Arabic sail, spate, which swept away all obstacles without warning and with loss of life of man and cattle. This was the very region through which Lehi traveled on his great trek. So again, he's showing, all this, we take it as symbolic imagery, because for us, it very much is, which is great. And that is perfectly fine. But for Lehi, this is also very real. Have you ever had those dreams where you're like, yeah, this is really significant, but I can't understand what in the world it is, because to you understand these details. You're like, what is going on? I get these details, but what's the meaning from it? You're too close to it, and until you have to describe it to somebody else in generic terms, like, you see the details for what they are, the specificity of it. I had this plane going over, and it was dropping these little tiny bombs, but it was actually the chaff to have missiles be ignored and explode above me. And as soon as that hit me, I decided to pick it up, and I'm like, I need to be prepared to travel because war is coming and I can't stay in my home. You see this in your dream, and you're like, well, that was weird. But when you try and describe it to somebody, as you start describing it in more and more general terms, suddenly it's like, oh, I'm seeing planes coming overhead, and they're dropping things. And right now, it's harmless, but I'm right in the path of where things are coming, so I'd better move. Suddenly, it becomes much more reasonable when you cut through to the generalizations and the symbolism. I think this is the same thing with Lehi, from what Hugh Nibley's talking about, that the elements of his dream are extremely familiar to him. It is like, yeah, there was this, and it's significant because God's giving you the dream. And that's why Nephi had to ask for the angel interpretation. Yeah, like, I see this, and I see how this is important, but I'm not getting it. What's the symbolism? This is cool. This is way cool. Sorry I'm going so slow, but, hey, you start talking about dreams, you just can't stop. The spring head and the sail, remember the sail is the torrent. The spring head and the sail, such are the two and only types of river, for he calls them rivers, known to the desert Arab. When Lehi dreams of people gone astray, they are lost in a trackless waste, wandering in strange roads. Yeah. Let's see here. Sorry, I was looking at the footnotes. The reason the rivers was in quotes is because they say, our river is an imperfect way of conveying the idea, but since we have no other word in English, the Book of Mormon must use it. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Interesting. Sorry. So those are the only two types of river known to the Arab. When Lehi dreams of people gone astray, they're lost in a trackless waste, wandering in strange roads, or blundering into broad roads, and they perish and are lost. Because of the mist of darkness, losing one's way is, of course, the fate that haunts every desert dweller. Sleeping and walking, the Arab poets are full of the terror of strange roads and broad ways, to symbolize what is utterly inaccessible. Lehi is shown a great and terrible gulf, an awful gulf, a tremendous chasm with one's objective, the tree of life, maddeningly visible on the other side. All who have traveled in the desert know the feeling of utter helplessness and frustration at finding one's way suddenly cut off by one of those appalling canyons with perpendicular sides. Nothing could be more abrupt, more absolute, more baffling to one's plans, and so will it be with the wicked in the day of reckoning. Dude, he is so right. Okay, like if you ever go to southern Utah and you start wandering around, go to Canyonlands. Okay, go to Canyonlands. Go to places that have these overlook of canyons. You might get a sense if you go to the Grand Canyon, but it's in a way it's entirely different unless you actually like wander among Canyonlands. You go there's areas that are just outside of like arches. There are areas that are uh, you just you can go wandering in the desert, just out in the oh god. There's areas that it looks like kind of like rolling plains, and then suddenly you hit one of these washes and one of these rivers that he's talking about in the desert, and it's dead dry. Okay, well that's no problem until there's a flash flood, and then it'll be like full of mud and debris and moving swiftly. And then you'll have these ones where maybe it's a trickle of water, like just again going around canyonlands and arches and stuff. You'll see this, and you'll see that there's these rivers where it's nice, soft, and quaint until there's a big rainstorm and it washes out the whole road. And it takes your stuff away, and then you get to these. You're going along these canyonlands, and you're like, "Oh, this is nice." I'm up on this plateau. I'm looking around, and then suddenly it's like, "Oh yeah, I want to get over there." And the road to get over there suddenly takes a detour in the other direction. You're like, "What the heck is going on?" And it's because you get to this ridge, and you see, boom, you have this huge drop off and huge chasm before you come up the other way, and so it has to do this big switchback thing down some other way over there to get you across. To go up another switchback over there to get to that spot, which is just, it's just over there. Oh, yeah, except the big chasm. It's insane. And so, yeah, he's exactly right. And if you just wander in wilderness desert areas that aren't settled, don't have roads, and just even wandering for like a mile or two around some location that you're at, you'll find this stuff. Like, I remember being a Boy Scout and going to... because we didn't have like an official campsite in Arches, we would free camp out on BLM land, which you can do. You just have to pack up everything. Don't leave any waste behind. And so we'd stay at a campsite and then go wander around, and just wandering within the campsite area, you'd find all this exact same stuff he's talking about. And when he's talking about broad and weird roads, for example, I took my kids to Zion's National Park, and we were going up the Emerald Pools trails, because there's 3 Emerald Pools. First one, you take a bridge across a small river in Zion, and you go over and you come down this way, and there's this kind of little trickling waterfall, and you go like under and around the sandstone that had been carved out, because it's like this big scooped wall. And that's the first Emerald Pool, is this, this little dribbling water from above going down to this pool before it meanders on its way down to the river. And you go up, the trail goes up a whole bunch of steps and in between some boulders, and then you come back over, and right where the water is dribbling over, above it is the second Emerald Pool. Well, here's the interesting thing. I did not notice the sign that had a foot on it saying, "This way is the trail," which is up a sheer rock face, because it was sheer rock. I'm used to, you have kind of this sandy trail cut through the underbrush. Well, I was goofing around with my kids, enjoying ourselves, taking a break at that second pool, just for a minute or two, taking pictures. Well, there was this sandy path that went above that Emerald Pool, and instead of seeing the trail, because there was this rock face, but they had the trail marker there, and I just didn't notice that trail marker, I decided to follow the sandy path up above it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's follow this up here. And it was not a well-kept trail. It was just kind of sandy. There was footprints of other people who had done the same stupid thing I did. And it took them to other little kind of places where the water had pooled up further. But it was definitely not the main trail. I mean, we're kind of scrambling over things. I'm like, I doubt this is it. We took a 10, 15-minute detour because of that. And so when he talks about wandering to strange roads, that's an easy thing in the desert, because you sit there and think you're following the trail, and you suddenly missed it. It's like if you're climbing in the mountains and you come to one of those rock slides, there's no trail on a rock slide. It's just a jumble of rocks. So unless you have the trail markers that say, go to this trail marker, stand there, look around until you find the other trail marker, and go to it, you've got nothing. Imagine being in the desert, where you have like very thin layer of sandy soil with barely holding on grass that suddenly gives out to just rocks. Unless you have a well-marked trail with the little stack of rocks, your guess is as good as mine. You can see that all over trails when you go into Zions, that it's easy to get lost. Again, you talk about dreams, you talk about life experiences. Ugh. So Broadway, this is all there. This is cool. Sorry. He's really making me see it, man. All right. Wherever else one might find parallels to these things in combination, they could only come from man who knew the desert. Ruba, one of the desert poets, describes in a single short poem the terror of the loneliness, the long journey, the mists of darkness, sultry and thick, the awful gulf, the broad ways, and the paths that stray. The Book of Mormon, in giving us not a few such clear and vivid snapshots, there are many more to come, of the life of another world, furnishes picturesque but convincing proof of its own authenticity. Nephi's complaint that they sought to take away my life, that they might leave me in this wilderness to be devoured by wild beasts, is ever in the mouth of the Arab poet. For to leave one's enemy lying in the desert to be devoured by wild beasts is standard and correct procedure. When Arabs quarrel, for all its popularity with the poets, no mere figure of speech. Dude. Mists of Darkness. This one may be more common for people. For people in the desert, it is weird. Because the Mists of Darkness, like if you've ever been in a fog bank, I had one on my mission. I went to San Diego. It was the longest day of my mission, and the first time I ever drove when I was tired. We had to get up at like 4:30 a.m. and drive into San Diego, out from the Imperial Desert, like out near Brawley and El Cajon. You can look at a map if you want to know. So we drove in to San Diego, had our kind of mission conference. We were able to go to the San Diego Temple. Super cool. And then drive back. So from 4:30 a.m. until about 12:30, we were driving. But what's worse is not only were we driving back way late, over I think it's the El Cajon Mountains. No, it would be further than El Cajon. And then we had a district that was like Granite Hills. I don't know what the name of the mountains are out there, honestly. But when you get out of San Diego, which is right near the coast, right, that cool, moist air gets up into the mountains. That becomes the fog and mist. And so you have to go over a whole bunch of these little mountains before you drop down into the Imperial Valley. I was so tired. I was like straining to keep my eyes open so I could see the red taillights in front of me. And I was trying to keep enough of a distance because we were all slowed down by this fog. Or if you've ever been in thick fog, if like you're in London or along the coast, you know, there's a point where it gets so thick you can't see further than 3, 4, 5 feet in front of you. There's an experience in Haleakala Crater in Hawaii. The clouds would come in every morning, and so it was this perfect mist. And so my family hung around. We had this cabin that we rented out, which was super awesome. So in the mornings, we'd play card games until the sun came and burned off the clouds. And then we'd go exploring and, into the crater where they had the bottomless pit, 65 feet. So thankfully, I've had that experience. But in the desert, that would be super freaky because even when it was daytime, remember how easy I was saying you could lose your way easily just because you think there's a path here because you see a sandy trail. but it's not the right one. And it happens. But imagine adding a mist to that where you can't see more than 5-10 feet in front of you. Like, it was really weird when a few years back there was just the right conditions to have a hoarfrost, which I had never experienced in my life before until these particular winters came by, where there would be enough of a misty clouds on the ground that the water would just accumulate on stuff and the frost would grow on things. Like I said, in my life, I had never experienced that until recent winters and in southern Utah. And the clouds would come barreling in and you'd drive through this like fog, because, you know, fogs are nothing but clouds with afraid of heights. And you're like, you just, all right, there's winding crazy desert up and downs and left and rights. And so you might have this crazy, you'll come up a ridge and then suddenly it turns, so you avoid going off another cliff. You slow down when that stuff happens. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I'm curious how many people have, I mean, like, I obviously have plenty of experience in Utah, and so all this is like very familiar to me, and especially the deserts. But I'm wondering how many people just have something that's totally different from where they're at. Like, being lost in a forest, not a thing I've worried with. Not something I've worried about. But yet I see, like, on Mythbusters or other YouTube videos, people just going in circles in a forest. And I'm like, really? Could it really be that hard to stay straight? It's just not an experience I've had. I've not lived in a, like, hugely, vastly forested area. What are the experiences of being lost in another place? What about, I wonder if you have visions of being lost on the ocean, if you're like an island population. You like just go out on the water and you get turned around and you have no idea where to go or how to navigate. What else could there be? Sorry, I'm imagining all this stuff. It's just gotten really cool. All right, the flight into the wilderness. Yeah, we can keep going. We'll do the flight into the wilderness, we'll call it. Sorry, I've had so much fun on this. That a wealthy citizen of Jerusalem should leave the land of his inheritance at a moment's notice and with no more substantial incitement than a dream may seem at first blush highly improbable, to say the least. Yet Lehi had brooded long and anxiously over the fate of Jerusalem, praying with all his heart in behalf of his people. Yeah, and when the dream came, he was prepared. Moreover, in taking his sudden departure, Lehi was doing not only the sensible, but also the ordinary thing. From the earliest times to the present day, the correct thing to do when the going got rough in the city and states of the Near East was simply to take off and seek the security of the desert. Sinue, a high official at the court of Amenemhet the first, fearing a palace revolution on the death of the king, rushed impulsively out into the night and the desert, where he would have perished of thirst had he not been picked up by some friendly Arabs who traded with Egypt. His story, 1,300 years older than Lehi's, illustrates the ease with which men passed between the desert and the town, and shows us how natural was the impulse to take to the sands in a crisis. Had not Moses and the prophets, and even Father Abraham himself, sought safety from their enemies by flight into the desert? Had not the whole nation of Israel done the same thing in the beginning? But what makes Lehi's story ring true with perfect pitch is the recent discovery that those very leaders of the Jews at Jerusalem, whose wickedness had obliged Lehi to leave the land while there was yet time, when they found the city on the verge of destruction, and themselves faced with the consequences of their own folly, hid in the wilds during the siege, and when all was lost, fled to Egypt. Hiding in the wilds was exactly what Lehi, and later anyone else who could escape, was doing. And if you look at all the big disaster movies, that still hasn't left us. Look at the disaster movies before 2012, like 2012, Armageddon, Deep Impact, or more modernly, Love and Monsters. That's a good one, by the way. Hardly anyone knows about it, but Love and Monsters is cool. The impulse when disaster is striking is you grab stuff and run. Get away from the city, get away from the disaster. So it hasn't eluded anyone. The only difference is that what used to be 90% an agrarian society across the world is now a 10% agrarian society with 90% living in the cities. So even if you did flee, a lot of people wouldn't make it. Oh, Babylon. Or should I say, alas, Babylon. The desert to which Sinu fled was the country of south of Palestine, the classic hideout land both of the Egyptian and the Jews, where men of all conditions and nations look to the Arab camp as a safe retreat and refuge, while the Syrian desert is the unveiled resort of defeated tribes. The proper home of the outcast, escapist, and discredited revolutionary was ever Edom and the South Country, the land of disoriented groups and of individual fugitives, where organized semi-nomad Arab tribes alternate with the flotsam and jetsam of sedentary society, with runaway slaves, bandits, and their descendants. Even the great merchants who brought forth the civilized Nabatean state placed their confidence in Diodorus, in their ability to disappear quickly and easily into the desert, like any common Bedouin. So let us not suppose that Lehi was the first big merchant to take to the back country with his worried family. Even in the present century, Arab farmers and town dwellers to flee the exactions of a tyrannical Turkish government fled to the desert and adopted the life of wandering Bedouins. And in recent years, thousands of fellahin raised to a life of farming might have been seen eking out a miserable existence on the sands of the Syrian desert as the result of hasty and ill-advised flight from their homes. Remember, this was written in 1953. And think of everything that's happened during that time and after that time. Like reestablishing Israel. We have mentioned that the Jews at Jerusalem who finally got away when the city fell ended up in Egypt. Many of them settled far up the Nile at Elephantine or Yeb. This famous colony has been described as but an eccentric deviation from the broad pathway of Hebrew history. It led nowhere and had no influence on the development of the Egyptian Judaism. In such words, we might describe Lehi's own migration, an eccentric deviation breaking off completely from the main current of Jewish history, but, like the Elephantine settlement, preserving its own peculiar version of transplanted Judaism intact. The Elephantine story by demonstrating the possibility of a development that scholars at first found inconceivable. I don't think you know what that word means. Inconceivable, and were long reluctant to believe, confirms the possibility of just such an expedition as Lehi's. The Jews throughout history display, as Montgomery observes, a constant tendency to revert to type and go back to the desert, and Lehi was by no means the first or last Jew to do so. Furthermore, it is not uncommon for rich town and country people, and even poor farmers, to take to the desert for a spell and enjoy, from time to time, a taste of the nomad life. So that Lehi's behavior in turning Bedouin was thoroughly conventional and respectable. Of course, the people who take that sort of vacation are those who already have a good deal of experience in the desert way and have acquired a liking for it. I concur. As to the direction taken by Lehi's party in the Book of Mormon is clear and specific. He took what we now know to have been the only possible way out, what with immediate danger threatening from the north and the eastern and western lands held by opposing powers on the verge of war, only the South Desert, the one land where Israel's traders and merchants had felt at home through the centuries, remained open. Even after Jerusalem fell, this was so. And the one route into that desert was the great trade road down the burning trough of Arabah. Sorry, there's a footnote here. The Hebrew stock had its original kinship with the tribes of the east and south Palestine, Syria, and especially southwards. The one line of maritime venture pursued by Judean policy was the development of the Red Sea routes, that is, the commercial prospects the state looked toward Arabia. So he's basically pointing out the references to go southward, Lehi. For a long time, the party traveled south-southeast and then struck out almost due east over a particularly terrible desert and reached the sea at a point to be considered later. Nephi is careful to keep us informed of the main bearing of every stage of the journey, and never once does he maintain a westerly or northerly trend. The party traveled for 8 years in but 2 main directions, without retracting their steps or doubling back, and many of their marches were long, forced marches. This entirely excludes the Sinaitic Peninsula as the journey of their wanderings, and fits perfectly with a journey through the Arabian Peninsula. The slowest possible march in a southeasterly direction in Sinai would reach the sea and have to turn north within 10 days. Yet Lehi's people traveled for many days, nay, months, in a southeasterly direction, keeping near the coast of the Red Sea all the while. 10 days take a foot traveler the entire length. 10 days take a foot traveler the entire length of the coast of Sinai, which runs in a southeasterly direction. And what of the rest of the 8 years? What entirely excludes Sinai as a field of Lehi's journeyings is the total lack at all times of timber to build ships with, to say nothing of a lush and beautiful land bountiful. It is quite probable, writes the present-day authority, that Solomon had to transport his ships, or the material for them, from the Mediterranean, for where on the shores of the Red Sea could timber be found for shipbuilding? The desert into which Lehi first retreated, and in which he made his first long camp, has been known since Old Testament times as the wilderness par excellence. Thanks to the Bible, it is this very section of the earth's surface to which the word wilderness most closely applies. Most closely applies, so that Nephi is using the word in its fullest correctness. He means waste, i.e. desert, and not jungle. Today, we call the region a desert, yet Woolley and Lawrence preferred the older word to designate this particular desert, the wilderness of Zin, Z-I-N. The term wilderness does not necessarily mean an uninhabitable waste, wrote Kenyon, thus associating the two words as Nephi does. Rather, it means a country such as nomads may inhabit, with oases and wadis where crops may be raised. So Lehi's wilderness had more fertile parts in which survival was possible. The particular waste in which Lehi made his first camp is among the most uninviting deserts on earth, though some observers think the area has enjoyed a little more rainfall in antiquity than it does today. All are agreed that the change of climate has not been considerable since prehistoric times. It was, at best, almost as bad as it is now. Wow, that's a ringing endorsement. Even if Lehi took the main southern route down Arabah, I can't decide whether they call it, I would say Arabia, but there's no I. And there's no double I. It's Arabah, Arabah, as he very probably did, since it was the direct road to the Red Sea and a caravan way known to all merchants. he would be moving through a desert so repelling that even the hardened Bedouins would avoid it like the plague. Nor need we look there for any monuments of his passing. The Egyptians, the patriarchs, the Jews, the Romans, the Crusaders, and the Arabs all passed over these tracks, and they have given us place names, and no more. Probably, in their eyes, the country was too detestable to merit further reference. Detestable certainly describes the place in the eyes of Lehi's people, who murmured bitterly, not kitties. The tables. You are not allowed. Detestable certainly describes the place in the eyes of Lehi's people who murmured bitterly at being led into such a hell. Next is tent people. But, wow. Okay. Tons of stuff to talk about. Mainly we focused on dreams and how Lehi's dream, for him, was like what we experience when we have vivid or important dreams, which is that it uses what we know. It draws on our own visions and understandings. This is why I'm very fascinated with the... Thank you, little kitty. Next time, not so many claws. I'm wondering for other people what their wilderness or common dreams are in the landscape. Hi, second one. What double kitty action. Anyway, ow! You still have sharp claws that even when you don't mean to use them, they're still sharp. So, the funny thing is that I'd be fascinated to understand what other people's ideas of wilderness are, or when they have dreams of great regions, what they have. Is it the rolling foothills of mountains like I've had? Is it the forests? Is it wastes of the desert? Is it... I mean, dude, that, I could just go on forever about that stuff, and especially these examples, but I never... Ow! Sorry. You guys, if you just want my attention, put your paw on me, not your claws. That's all you have to do. I'm not against petting you. Just don't claw me. Anyway. Oh, now you got your engines going. So, I sit here and think that the other common area I've had dreams about is a really weird Salt Lake City where there's like an ocean that has come into the middle of the city and all kind of stuff. Like it became a coastal city. So, hey, but if you watch disaster movies, that may just happen. Oh, you kitties are looking at me so expectantly. So, I never really thought of Lehi's dream as much more literal than what I'm used to. I always just imagine that in church, they have the Lehi's dream kind of painting where they have the iron rod / railing that is very straight, leads to the tree of life, the big kind of Babylonian building. It's very straightforward, right? There's the Japanese picture, the picture that was done by a Japanese artist who was really cool. I really love that one. It's much more expressive, but it has all sorts of different trees. It's very beautiful. But just like literally think of it like Lehi would. A very, very, very desert place. The desert washes, where it's just this muddy, filthy, terrible river that washes people away during a flash flood compared to the gentle spring water from the tree of life. And the crazy wastes of the desert, which is easy to be lost in, and the towering 12-story mud houses of Babylon. It's just way cool because I'd never thought of it like that. And then, in addition to the idea of bugging out to the desert, I'm like, yeah, I kind of have that offer on hand too. Should everything start falling apart, I should just run out to the desert. As long as there's water, food, and shelter. And that's my one thing. That's my one thing about the idea of people bugging out, right? All the survivalists and preparedness. I'm like, what is the best place to be sustainable? Go to a place where you know that you have not only food and shelter, but like for long term. You got to learn how to grow stuff. I'm terrible at it so far, but I need to work on it. Oh, now they're settling down. Anyways, I hope you learned as much as I did about thinking of these dreams as perhaps we have more dreams than we think we do. Perhaps the significant dreams that we have are more commonplace, but we just don't know how to recognize it. Because we think it needs to be some sort of grand visionary thing, when in reality it just needs to be vivid and meaningful. I would make that suggestion. I'd also make the suggestion that it's important to, if you want to have more miraculous type dreams like that, you got to be praying with all your heart like Lehi. Not just for the dream, but to actually do something to help further the kingdom of God, whether that's for your own salvation or the salvation of others around you. I would also suggest that, if you feel like the world might come to an end in some way, that be prepared, but do it with the Spirit. Like, seriously. With recent events, I had long contemplated what should I be doing to prepare for my family or my war building or anything else like that. It's along the lines of, how am I supposed to help them should someone come knocking with their truck and shooting with their guns? And, my first impulse is, let's arm to the teeth and make sure that people know that we're protected. Yeah, that would work. But at the same time, when I started thinking about it and trying to pray about it, I'm like, I just felt I did not need to prepare in that way. And I realized, well, maybe I should humble myself. Maybe, despite the effectiveness and deterrent of arming yourself to the teeth, there might be better ways. And so, whatever you feel like you need to prepare for your family and your friends, the best thing to be prepared with is the Spirit and being able to follow it. So, with that, I'll give you a little bit of a cute goodbye, and may God be with you.